Sometimes there's no one else who loves me like you used to. Sometimes we're not ourselves. There's no one I can turn to. And I know all the feelings that we shared out in the past. And I know your relationships are never meant to last. And I'll take some time, but I'll be alright. We're moving on. We're moving on. I know times are tough, but I've had enough. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're moving on. Sometimes there's no one else who loves me like you used to. Sometimes we're not ourselves. There's no one I can turn to. And I'll take some time, but I'll be alright. We're moving on. We're moving on. I know times are tough, but I've had enough. We're moving on. We're moving on. We're moving on.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. I see you guys are in the house. Let me turn on the chat for a quick second so I can give some shout outs. I see you, Charlie. Welcome to Unfiltered. Guys, this is episode 20. You all requested this particular show, and I'm super excited about it today. I have some confessions to make, which I'll do in a minute. But you guys, hey, Leon, I see you. Hey, Mom, I see you. Sekou, welcome. Hey, Joyce, welcome to the broadcast. Today is going to be very insightful. It's going to be very enlightening for all of us. I know that it was for me, so make sure that you like and share. Make sure that you invite some other people to the broadcast. And Stephanie Croft, if you're out there, Stephanie, I am just seeing your email. Last week, I was like, there's a third person. I got you today, Stephanie. I got you today. Thank you so much for being on Unfiltered. Hey, Tiffany. Thank you, guys. I see y'all are hopping on. Listen, we have a lot to cover today, so I'm not going to belabor, but I definitely, hey, Santrell, beautiful woman, Evril. Guys, you want to get this information to everyone. It shifted my own perspective about how I view the world. I was like, dang, that's the kind of information we're talking about today. So with that being said, we're going to start with a couple of history facts here. So let me go ahead and get those things up. Guys, today is July the what? Are we on the 21st? We're on the 21st, absolutely. And guess what? This is the anniversary of Apollo 11. Interesting that this is the anniversary of Apollo 11 because you all know what happened yesterday, right? Yesterday, Jeff Bezos and his team went into space. So that was on the anniversary. So those are things that are happening this week. But we also have some birthdays we're celebrating. This guy right here, I love him, love him, love him. He actually, this would have been, I believe, I want to say his 70th birthday today. And I love this quote: no matter what people tell you, words and ideas can change the world. So, happy birthday and to Robin Williams. Let me say something. That is so true. And the words that you're going to hear today from Attorney Winfield Murray, who is not only a friend of Unfiltered, but he is well versed in the law. He teaches race and the law at Morehouse University. He's deep into it. So we're going to have some chains broken off our minds today. But I have the most famous person's birthday today. Has to be none other than Gifty. So Gifty Myers, we want to give you a shout out and say happy birthday to you. Today is her birthday, and she is actually going to be giving the gift today. She is the sponsor of today's giveaway for the Be Blessed segment, where we give away cash every single week. So that's going to be coming up later. But guys, I want to get started. We're going to talk about redlining today, but I want to put a visual in your mind, and then I'm going to play a short video, and I'm going to bring on my guest. So when people are like, what does redlining mean? There's a visual right here that comes to mind. It means same house, right? But different neighborhoods and different race, same income bracket, same crime rates. It doesn't matter, but it's not going to be valued the same. That is the impact that redlining has had on the community. And I was like, okay, well, I grew up thinking, well, this must have to do with the fact that there's more crime there. And I always kind of took the stance that because I grew up in a family that we didn't have a lot, but they taught us we needed an education. My mom made sure that we were clean. We went to school every day, and I was able to succeed. So in my mind, that's the world I lived in. But I have to look back and say that I was pushed. And I have to look back and say that I was blessed to be in an environment that fostered that growth and development, because that's not the truth for everybody. That is not everyone's story. And as I was learning more about this whole history of redlining and the impacts that it have on us today, I have to confess that I am guilty. Like, I'm guilty of being one of those people who didn't understand what I didn't know, because it's easy to be like, well, why don't you just move? Well, you're going to see in a minute why people just don't move. Well, why don't you just get a leg up? Well, you're going to learn throughout this why it's not that simple, because there's a long lasting impact that still is taking place today. So with that being said, guys, I am going to open with a short video clip and bring on our guest right after.
I was born here in Reserve, back in a while back. I went to school here, married a high school sweetheart, the typical stuff. At the time I moved into this relatively new community, I noticed the difference in the guys my age that I grew up with.
What did you notice?
The deaths, the cancer.
This is Reserve, Louisiana, a town of 10,000 the Environmental Protection Agency says has some of the most toxic air in America. For decades, people in Reserve have had health problems, ranging from dizziness and severe headaches to liver and lung cancer. Many believe this plant, hundreds of yards from some of their homes, is the source.
Why haven't you moved?
Why should I move? How can I move? I struggled all my life to build this. Where am I going to start over again? Where do I get the money, the resources? What about my history here? My kids were raised here. I've lived here. I come right up around the corner on 23rd Street, and I bought this property myself, and I was able to. Why can't I enjoy the fruits of my labor? What is happening in the American system here, that it could come to the question of a poor person, a person that come up with meager means? We strive, here's the American dream, to own your own home, to educate your children, be able to have a community that's safe. And then I'm asked that question, why don't you just move? What do you mean just move? Right now, in good conscience, who would I actually sell this house to? What poor, unsuspecting family would I trick into moving into this debt trap?
What poor, unsuspecting family would I trick into moving into this death trap? Please help me welcome Attorney Winfield Ward Murray to the show to talk to us about redlining.
Good morning, and thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming back. It's definitely by popular demand.
Well, I gotta say, this is going to be a heavy episode, and at times I'm probably going to appear like I'm rambling. The problem is that there's so much information here, there's so much to tackle, that it is just, it's almost inconceivable that we would try to accomplish this in 45 minutes to an hour, but we're going to try our best. I will say that in today's episode, Vern, we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about redlining, but we're also going to talk about eminent domain. I don't think that you can talk about one without talking about the other. The last time that I was on the show, we were talking about the critical race theory and all of that. And so a lot of times we spend a great deal of time talking about the criminal justice system, but we don't talk about civil law and those laws and how they have impacted African-American communities, African-American wealth, and all of that can be tied and related to redlining and eminent domain. So first off, before we get started, I just want to explain to your guests, you've already explained what redlining is, but I just want to explain what eminent domain is.
Yes, please.
Eminent domain is when you take, when the government takes private property for public use. And when they take it for public use, they are supposed to give you just compensation. That's what the law says. Now, the question becomes, what is just compensation? What's fair market value for your home? Now, this is something that's going on right now. So we can talk about what happened in the 1930s when this all started. We can talk about what happened between 1940s and 1960s when eminent domain and redlining were at their pinnacle. But what I want your viewers to know is that this is happening right now. So case in point, we live in the city of Atlanta, most of us. And in the city of Atlanta, you have the Beltline that's coming in. And that's 6,500 acres surrounding this 22-mile loop that will go through every in-town neighborhood in the city of Atlanta. And some of these people that live in these communities are being, their land is being taken either to make parks along the Beltline or for some other reason. And they are supposed to be provided with just compensation. Go ahead. Bernadette, you had a question?
You're talking about right now.
Yes, I'm talking about right now, in this moment.
Right now.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so in some of these predominantly African-American communities, let's talk about what just compensation is. In some of these communities, homes have been selling for $45,000, $50,000, $65,000. So if I'm the government and I want to come in and take your land, because I'm going to turn it into a park or something else along the Beltline. Just compensation, some people would say just compensation would be $60,000. If every other house in the neighborhood is selling for $60,000 and I come in as the government and say, hey, I'm going to give you $60,000. And you know what? I'm actually going to go a little bit above that, okay? I'm going to give you $62,500. But I know as the government, right, that once we build out the Beltline, that the homes in this neighborhood are going to sell for $450,000, $550,000, $650,000. Is $62,500 actually just compensation for that home? That's the question that you have to ask. And then when you look at that video and the man said, where am I going to go? Oftentimes when you have eminent domain, $62,500 isn't going to get you into a new house. So effectively what has happened is that the government has just transitioned you from a homeowner to a renter. And if you have been able to hold on to that home for just maybe 2 more years, right, when the Beltline pushed through, you would have been able to sell, you could sell that house. Instead of selling it for $60,000, you would have been able to sell it for $450,000, $500,000, which means that generational wealth is being built. But that's not what is happening here.
You know, that thing right there, as you were listening, it was kind of like what really stuck out to me was, had you been able to hold on a little bit longer, right? And a lot of us are not able to hold on a little bit longer because we don't know, because we don't understand what's happening, and because we're in this situation that was created. That's what I've been learning. This situation was created, it was intentional, and people are living in it. And so they take what they can get because they're like, oh, well, that sounds good because, you know, the house, I need some repairs done and I can't afford to do that. And then a lot of them folks, they come in your house and they look at it and they're like, they basically make you feel like it's falling apart and you can just take this money and go get you something nice. Where are you going to do that at?
Right. That's
$1,000.
So let me just now go a little bit deeper and say, what is the government? And I don't want to sound like I'm a conspiracy theorist, but I am just going to tell you my thoughts on this. What has the federal government done? What role has the federal government played in all of this between redlining and eminent domain? Oftentimes, they will say that what we're doing is for the public good, right? We're going to build parks for the public good. But the people who lived in that community never get to enjoy that park because they're all pushed out. Something that happened, now I'm going to go back historically just for a second and tell you.
You know, Murray will be right back on. He just fell off. And I got to tell you, as he's talking, I'm just thinking about, and he's back. And as he's talking, I'm just thinking about the history, right? The history. Go ahead, Murray, with what you were saying.
Yeah, so eminent domain was used to push through freeways, highways, through communities of color, okay? What that effectively did was it tore communities apart, right? It made people have to leave the communities that they grew up in, the neighbors that they knew. It also created food deserts. It created lack of doctors and medical offices, right? Because literally the highways were carved around white neighborhoods and pushed through Black neighborhoods, which had a horrible effect on Black neighborhoods, right? So even if you look at, and I'm just talking about Atlanta because I live in Atlanta, but if you look at Atlanta, you can literally see how the freeways literally were curved and twisted around neighborhoods, and in many instances just pushed through Black neighborhoods. Now, you might say, well, that only happened in dilapidated, poor Black neighborhoods. Bernadette, could you pull up that picture that I sent you?
Absolutely.
Okay. This home was owned by Dr. Hamilton Holmes. He was a Black physician, okay? And this home was located on Boulevard, near where Freedom Parkway is now. This neighborhood was an expanse of African-American wealth, okay? Way back when African-Americans really shouldn't have even been able to achieve that type of wealth. You had those types of homes. Some people might want to even call them mansions, you know, right there on Boulevard. Well, when it came time to push through neighborhoods, they pushed through that neighborhood because it also, if you don't care about African Americans and their ability to create generational wealth, then you're not going to care about their neighborhoods. And in fact, some people, especially in the South, might be inclined to push through those neighborhoods because they don't like the fact that African Americans are achieving this type of wealth and prosperity. Why not tear it down? Why not push roads and highways through a neighborhood like that if you don't want to see African Americans achieve?
Wow. And so I'm listening to it and I'm just thinking about the long-term impacts of running a highway through somebody's backyard. Like, nobody's going to want to live there in the future, right? So it's kind of like the guy said, what unsuspecting person would I sell this death trap to? Who wants to live right next to a freeway or right up under a freeway and hear all the road noise and all that other stuff? The quality of life was just changed dramatically. And it was kind of like, we're using these laws. Those laws, they didn't use those laws in other affluent neighborhoods. They used them in our neighborhoods. And as I watched it, you could see it happening across the country, Murray. You could see it happening across the country. So I'm thinking about this redlining thing, and I got to tell you, so I'm going, okay, well, you guys, I'm going to be the devil's advocate. That happened a while ago. That happened so long ago. We're talking in the last 100 years, people, about laws that were on the books, Murray, by the federal government. This New Deal thing that I know you're going to get into, which is a big deal, right? That said we could not have access to certain housing. We couldn't have access to loans. Do y'all know that there are certain towns where they built a brick wall across the town, and this side was for the Blacks, the Hispanics, the Indians, the Asians? It wasn't just us. It was for anyone who did not look Caucasian or white. And it's in the books with the Federal Housing Authority that you could not give loans to Black people in certain neighborhoods.
So here's the thing. You're absolutely right. Redlining was approved. It was sanctioned by the federal government, right? So basically redlining said, we're not going to approve any mortgages if you have Black people that are living in your neighborhood, right? We're not going to approve any mortgages. So what does that mean? Well, that means we can't get a house. We can't get housing that's going to increase in value, right? So my white counterpart can get a federally funded loan so that they can secure housing. Over time, that housing is going to increase in value. What does that mean? That means that they can use the equity in their home to send their children to college. It means that they can use the equity in their home to take care of aging parents. It means that they are continuously increasing their wealth while African Americans sit stagnant, because they could not even get loans simply because of the color of their skin. And this was not based on any study. So the federal government said, we're not going to provide African Americans with loans, and we're not going to provide developers with loans to build housing if African Americans move in, because the property values will decrease. That was not based on any study, none. It just was, we think that this is the case, and so this is what we're going to do. What's more, what people may not know is that because the housing inventory was so limited, and I want everybody to hear me on this part, because the housing inventory was so limited for African Americans, that when African Americans could actually purchase homes, they actually paid more than Caucasians, more than white people, because they didn't have as many options, which means that the housing value did not decrease as the federal government would like for you to think. It actually increased.
Okay, so this is a perfect opportunity for me to share, because when I started looking at it, guys, there's a website that shows they have all the maps. It's history. They have all of the maps, all the areas that were redlined, all the notes pertaining to what you could and could not do. And so I just pulled up, just for my sake, I wanted to see, guys, what you're looking at on the screen right now is the red line map for Birmingham, Alabama. Okay, and so you guys will see in the southern part of the map, there's this really bright green section. There's a bunch of the, red, which is considered undesirable. We all know about that. They rated them, A, B, C, and D, right? And A was first grade property. So I want you to pay attention to the bottom part where it's green. And of course, the upper part where it's red would be North Birmingham. And so I decided to do my own research. And so I'm gonna zoom in there. So this is the Birmingham Country Club area, right? You can see Mountain Brook Estates, you can see Mountain Brook Road, Overbrook Road, and all that. And I wanted to see, Murray, the value of the homes in that area today. This redlining happened, years and years and years and decades ago, but let's see the impact that it has on it today. And so I wanted to see the values of those particular homes. And so I looked it up. And those homes are 3.8 million, 2.9 million, 2.15 million. Look at the map to the left. You guys will see the green area. That's the golf course, the country club. You guys will see that this says Mountain Brook, Alabama. This is the same exact area, 3,990,000. Look to the left at all the yellow dots. These are $1 million homes. So when Murray is talking about they were building equity up and they were able to use that money to continue to invest and send their kids to school, he's not lying. But let's take a look at what the houses in the red area of just North Birmingham are. I'm gonna pause for the cause. You're looking at $19,000 houses, $47,000, just dilapidated condition, what they could get $85,000. The impacts are still prevalent today. So you can't say that redlining didn't have long-lasting impacts. You can't say that it didn't create generational wealth, but that wealth was not for us. So Murray, when we look at stuff like that, and he'll be back in a second, but when we look at stuff like that, family, we have to check ourselves. So Derek and I were talking the other day, and a while ago when people would talk about, reparations, and people would talk about, what we're owed and the 40 acres and all that stuff, a lot of people don't understand it, especially people who've been able to come up, people who've moved out, of the hood and are in the middle class. It's funny, I was watching something, they said the middle class is a figment, the Black middle class is only a figment of the Black middle class's imagination. Because if you look at the redlining, if you're in the Black middle class, you're probably living in a Black middle class neighborhood that you're allowed to live in. So let's really pay attention to what happened then and the impact that it's still having today. But Murray, it goes further than that, right? It goes further than just our property values.
It does, but I just want to point out something from what you highlighted, and that is, just think about this. What can an African-American family do with a home that is worth $47,000 and their counterpart's home is worth $1 million? What's happening to the family in that situation? But I'm gonna take it a step further. Couldn't the person in the African-American family that owns the $47,000 house do more than the African-American family that is then turned into a renter because of eminent domain? So there are all of these, there are layers here that you have to think through, right? And then the other thing that I want to ask is redlining still happening today? Well, the answer is yes. It's still happening today. So instead of, the federal government saying, oh, we're not going to back your loan if you want to move into that African-American neighborhood, or if you're African-American, we're not going to approve your home loan, right? Instead of it happening that way, it happens with higher interest rates, right? So if you move into a predominantly Black neighborhood, or if you as a borrower are African-American and banks know it, the federal government loans know it, you're going to have higher interest rate. Studies have shown this over and over and over again. Someone that doesn't look like you will go in and get an interest rate of 2.5%. You will go in and get an interest rate of 4.75%, or you will be only allowed to have an adjustable rate loan instead of a fixed rate loan. So, that may not sound like a big difference. Let's even make it smaller. Let's say that it's somebody else would be given 2.5% and you would be given 3.5%. Yeah, that's a big difference. Over the life of the loan, you're paying thousands upon thousands of dollars more over the life of that loan than your white counterparts, right? And it doesn't stop there. You're going to have higher home insurance rates, right? Because you live in quote unquote an African-American neighborhood, right? So the person who has a bigger home, a more costly home in a white neighborhood is actually going to pay less for homeowners insurance, property insurance than you. By the time you put this together, by the time you factor in that you are now paying more over the course of your loan and your interest rate. You are now paying higher property, homeowners insurance, property insurance. You are losing a considerable amount of money. Considerable.
It's funny you're talking about that because I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, but here's the other side. But we gave you Ben Carson. I mean, we put him over housing and urban development to fix these problems.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
you know what Elizabeth Warren said? Elizabeth Warren told him the greatest scandal of his appointment would be his failure to address the disparities in housing when it comes to African Americans, because we are further behind today than we were 30 years ago.
So listen, this has happened in this country for a long time, where you put a Black figurehead into a key position, but they know not to make any advances for the African American community, or else they won't have that job for very long. Okay, I just need to pull up something on my phone because it's so much information I can't remember it all. But I just wanted to say, if you think that redlining and eminent domain has stopped or doesn't exist anymore, let's just go back a couple of decades to when the Olympics came to Atlanta. Okay, so when the Olympics came, there were about 30,000 low-income Atlanta residents that were displaced from their homes in order to make room for the new Olympic Stadium. 30,000. I didn't say 30. I didn't say 3,000. 30,000 African Americans were displaced, right? And maybe they were low income. But guess what the benefit of living in town is? It means that you have access to buses. You have access to MARTA, no matter how limited it is. I'm not saying that MARTA is perfect, but I am saying that you have access to get around. When you are displaced, when you are pushed out of the city and you have to move where there isn't a transit line, what happens? What does that mean for your ability to make an income? So let's go one step further. By the year 2000, because remember, they said, well, we're going to make this community better and we're going to bring all of these African Americans back in, but they're going to live in better conditions. Well, let's look at how many actually came back in, right? So by the year 2000, 78 families from the people that were displaced by the building of the Olympic Stadium, 78 families moved back in. Out of 30,000, I said 78.
I had to come back on and get closer to the microphone and the audio because it sounds like you said 78 families out of the 30,000 that were displaced.
That's right. That's right. And then there were all of these stipulations for you to get back in. So for instance, they gave priority to families that were married. Like, so if you were a husband and wife, then you stood a stronger chance of getting back into the community than if you were a single mom or a single dad, right? So again, what is this doing to families? What is this doing to communities? When you displace 30,000 people, you lose the community. The community is gone, right? And this has been happening over and over and over again. When they decided to build the highway system, Mechanicsville, Summer Hill, Peoplestown, these were three strong, vibrant communities in Atlanta that were destroyed by the highway system coming in. And even after the highway system came in, the people that remained still made it a community as much as they could. Not the community that existed before. And now you have with the Beltline, again, African Americans being disenfranchised from those communities all over again. All over again. Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Okay, yeah, here we go. Let me tell you what's interesting. We were never able to participate generations ago when it should have happened, right? In acquiring the land and acquiring the health and getting these low interest rate loans. I mean, we just weren't able to participate in that process. So people had to literally work to save enough money to build a house, right? Or they could get a small high risk loan. if you look at what happened back then, let's take it back to the real estate bubble of 2008 and how in 2008, the subprime lending market, which let's be honest, it mostly impacted already marginalized communities. It mostly impacted African Americans, Spanish people. They're like, oh, anybody with a W-2 could get a $500,000 loan, right? But then that goes back to not being educated about how finances work. So it mostly impacted people of color, Spanish, Black, Asian, it mostly impacted people of color because they were getting these loans on bad terms. It was all in bad faith. And when the real estate market crashed, Murray, I'll never forget, Derek had an office in the West End. And if he's on, he can comment about that. But Derek had an office in the West End. And the mortgage person told him, oh, that area is redline. We're not doing loans over there. Told him. In 2008, the area had been redlined because they had decided, oh, too much mortgage fraud has happened in that area, so we're not doing loans in that area. And he had to have somebody have cash to be able to buy. But you know who was buying up everything? The people who already had the money, the people who already had the cash, the people who weren't in these loans, right? So it's still happening, and it's kind of like this cycle that continues. But before we move on, and before I let you go, I want you to jump into how this impact affected education. How does redlining affect education? I mean, by law, every county has to have a school, no child left behind, that's the law. So what do you complain about?
Well, let me ask you this question real quick, Bernadette. How much time do we have?
Oh, we've got about 15 minutes.
Okay, so there's a lot that I want to try to cover quickly. So let me just say this first and foremost. 3 to 4 million people in this country have been displaced because of eminent domain. Okay, 3 to 4 million people. Most of those people look like us. They are African Americans. They are brown and Black people. Those are the people that have been disproportionately impacted by eminent domain. Now, I'm going to come back to that, but I'm going to answer your question about education. When you have redlining, right? What happens is that you are creating you're creating a socioeconomic condition that doesn't have the opportunity to grow, right? Because when you don't allow people to take out mortgages, when you don't allow people to come in and purchase homes, then the community becomes stagnant. When there are no grocery stores and there are these food deserts that have been created, when there are no medical offices right nearby, when you have the contaminated soil, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, pollution and all of this that is becoming a problem because of redlining and eminent domain working hand in hand to basically kill a community. I'm just going to say kill, because that's what's happening. When you have that to kill a community, then we all know that public schools they get textbooks and they, are able to do things because of the tax base in a community. But when you're killing a community and the tax base goes down and down and down and down again, that means that you don't have the resources that a community just up the road has. If you take a look at it, for a long time, this is changing slightly now, but for a long time, the communities in and around the Atlanta University Center have been considered some of the poorest in Georgia, right? Well, so that's on one end of Northside Drive. But Northside Drive also takes you to Buckhead. The poorest part of Atlanta is literally 6 miles from the richest part of Atlanta, right? Only 6 miles. We're not talking about an hour's drive. We're talking about a 6-minute drive, okay?
That's the same in DC behind the White House. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what's happening is all of those kids in Buckhead have the best. They have the most resources. Whereas the kids who were growing up 6 miles down the road don't have access they're using outdated textbooks. So again, we talk about criminal justice reform all the time, but there's this new thing that is called environmental justice. because we are now at a point where we realize that it's these environmental justices that go hand in hand with criminal justice reform, right? Just let me take it another step further and just say, before there was all of this interest in the Beltline on the west and south sides of Atlanta, there used to be factories in those areas that contaminated the soil, okay, for those neighborhoods. The government has known that for a long time and has done nothing to help those individuals. And I'm talking about Atlanta. The video that you showed at the top of the show was from Louisiana, but we're talking about Atlanta right now. Contaminated soil allowed to persist. So higher rates of cancer, higher rates of, poor health, all of this. But now that other people are moving into the communities, the government has taken it upon themselves to remediate the soil. If that's a message, if that's not a message to you, then I don't know what is. If that doesn't wake you up a little bit, if you don't become a woke person.
If you're not a wokie after that, they running after the wokies, but
the fact that they now are spending huge amounts of money to remediate the soil for the new people that are moving in, whereas the people who lived there before were just allowed to exist, right? And I see people talking about Flint, Michigan. That's absolutely right.
the water.
Over there. The video that Bernadette showed at the top of the show deals with the town in Louisiana, right? When you have eminent domain and you take land away from people, when you have redlining and you're basically killing a community, well, when businesses see that, when people who want to build a factory sees that, where are they going to go? Are they going to deal with the pushback that they're going to get if they try to put a factory in Buckhead or Grant Park? No, they're not going to do that. They're going to be like, clearly the government doesn't care about this community. The citizens of that community, the residents of that community don't have the financial or fiscal resources to fight back. So we'll put it there. We'll put the dump there. We'll put the factories there. And so what happens is over time, you have carcinogens that are in the air, carcinogens that are in the water, carcinogens that are in the soil. So everything you touch is laced with carcinogen, which means that your life expectancy goes down. So instead of the people who live, 10 miles away living to be 75, 80, you live to be 52, 54. Think that doesn't impact families?
Wow.
You think that when you lose a person that is still earning an income and bringing that money into the household at 52, 54, when that person dies, you don't think that that impacts the people that are living in the house, whether it be the wife or the husband or the children or the grandparents, whatever the case may be? And so then you just have this cyclical effect where it just keeps happening and keeps getting worse. And it's like a downward spiral. You're just going down the drain. The community is literally going down the drain.
That is, it's eye-opening, but it's interesting because even in North Carolina, where they put all the pig and the chicken farms, and all the people are getting cancers and tumors and all this other kind of stuff, there are more nuclear plants built near disadvantaged communities. Why? Because we don't come together and have the power to be able to fight it, because money, wealth creates power. It creates advocacy on a different level, because you want to know who they listen to, follow the money. That's just like here, soil remediation wasn't important when you're talking about this group of people who are, they're probably renting, the house been paid for by the grandmother, but it's only worth $20,000 because there's a cycle that's been created, right? Mm-hmm. When you were talking about education, I had to sit back for a second, because I'm gonna keep it real. How many Black people move out of Black neighborhoods to move to a white neighborhood to go to get their kids in a better school district? Because that school district, they ain't got no computers, their PTA is dysfunctional, they don't have an after school program that you want to send them to. People are literally taking the money, who have money, us, out of those communities and moving somewhere else. In addition to that, you have the people, I'll never forget the year in Clayton County where they were arresting folks for enrolling their people in schools in Fayette County.
Mm-hmm.
And literally on the news, like, oh, we don't want you here because you don't pay taxes here, so your kids can't go to school here. People were literally getting arrested and on TV crying because they said, I can't send my kids to school in an unaccredited district. I want my kids to have better too. But
that's absolutely right.
That
That's absolutely right. So, you know, for a long time, Atlanta seemed to be immune to that. So when I was growing up, you know, in the second grade, I started going to all African-American schools. So I went to all African-American schools, you know, from Collier Heights to Douglas High School. And, you know, you could find people that, you know, sort of ran the gamut of, you know, socioeconomic gambit, you know, from people who had quite a bit of money to people that didn't have so much money. But there was life and learning that comes from that, right? But that doesn't exist as much because of what's happening to the city, right? And it would be easy for us to just blame gentrification. But what I really hope the message today is it's more than just gentrification, right? It is what our federal government, in many instances, has allowed to take place. It is what our local municipalities have allowed to take place. So it's more than just gentrification. This has been going on since the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. I just want to also say that, you know, the last time I was on your show, Bern, we talked about Lake Lanier and the fact that it was previously an all predominantly African-American town known as Oscarville, okay? Oscarville was a thriving Black community when a young white woman by the name of Mae Crow was allegedly raped by 2 Black men, okay? Now, the way the story goes, Mae Crow never actually saw her attacker, so she doesn't know if they were white, Black, or anything else. But the town, the white people in the town said, oh, they were Black, right? So they actually they arrested 3 Black men. 1 Black man was taken out of the jail and he was beat with a crowbar to death before he was even tried and convicted. The other 2 were tried and convicted in one day. Now, we all know that that is a sham of a trial, right? Because how do you get evidence? How do you put on a proper defense if you are tried and convicted all in one day, okay? You were arrested, tried, and convicted in one day, right? So that's just a sham of a trial.
That's not even possible, Murray. First of all, it's not even possible. You can't even voir dire the jury in one day. Like, it's not even possible. You can't pick a jury. You can't go over the rule of law. There couldn't have been an opening statement. There couldn't have been any witnesses who were on the stands. There couldn't have been a closing. There definitely wasn't no deliberation. It's impossible.
Right. But guess what happened? It happened. They were, I believe, ultimately killed. But that wasn't enough. Right? Because see, for African Americans, the way that we have been able to accumulate wealth is through land, right? Even if we haven't been able to accumulate it to the same degree that other races have, that's where we were able to accumulate wealth. So what happened to Oscarville? Well, Oscarville doesn't exist anymore because the white people who lived in and around Oscarville then took it upon themselves to terrorize the neighborhood, to push out all of the Blacks through fear, intimidation, and brutality. Meaning, when I say brutality, beating residents as they walked home or whatever the case may be, right? In a span of 6 years, the thriving town of Oscarville, which had 1,000 African-American residents, was completely gone. There were no residents left, not one, not any. So what happened then? Well, not only is that still not enough, not only have I killed the people who allegedly raped this young white woman, which we don't even know if they actually did it, not only have we moved out all 1,000 African-American residents, but we don't want them to come back. So what should we do? Let's make it basically a order for the city, right? So go ahead.
Let's show them where Oscarville is today and what it looks like. So what y'all are looking at, where's Oscarville? Point it out in this map. It's under the water.
It's under the water.
The town is under the water. I want everybody to grasp that. The whole town is under the water.
Under Lake Lanier.
On top are these little islands with these little resorts and these little houses and these little boat ramps. But underneath that beauty is a town that people ran out of and murdered and killed to take the land, and then they filled it with water. I remember when the great drought happened here and Lake Lanier and the water started to recede, remember? That's when all of this, people started to talk about this. When the water started to recede, there used to be a racetrack there. And the stands from the racetrack started to stick up out of the water. Whole buildings in the water.
Churches, schools.
They took people who had been buried. Yes, Laviva, it's deeper than we can see. Whew, that water is murky. Mm-hmm. They took cemeteries, took the bodies, and relocated them. We think that's what they said they did. Where do they do that at? Mm-hmm. Where do they do that?
So listen, I know that, there are all of these theories that, the ghosts of the residents, are what's pulling people under the water when people go swimming. But in truth, I will say this, that when you have churches and schools and houses that used to exist on a site, and then you fill it with water deteriorates whatever is there. And what you have is things are decomposing and you have them basically falling apart underwater, and you have these undercurrents that are existing, right? That you can't account for the undercurrents because it's not an ocean where it's just, there are no churches and things to worry about. If you're swimming and beneath the surface, a church just collapses and falls apart because you don't know, and the current of the water swoops you in, you may drown. I mean, so I'm not saying that happens in every situation, but what I am saying is that this is our history. This is what has happened to us. Clearly, you would not think that anybody would fill in a town with water without removing the debris and the churches and the schools and the houses and the cars and the racetracks and all of that. And you would want to make it a safe place. Even if you don't care anything about the people that live there, you would want to make it a safe place for the people that were going to use this, because it is used for swimming, it's used for boating, right? You would think that. Now, I know that we're getting shorter on time. So
No, keep going, because listen, as you're talking about that, I want to tell you guys something. I'm glad you mentioned that. So looking at Lake Lanier, y'all, what they did was they filled this whole thing with water, right? Left the houses, left the racetracks, left the schools, left the cemeteries, whatever was in there, they left. And what they did, Murray, was any trees that were still sticking out, they just went through and cut the tops of the trees off.
That's right.
That's why it's so dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
They just went through and cut the tops of the trees off. So it ain't what it looked like.
So I just want to say, for all of you that may be shocked about Lake Lanier, do you think that that's just a one-off? Do you think that just happened with Lake Lanier in Georgia? The answer to that question is no. No, there are more than 100 instances of cities and towns that had been previously African-American that are now underwater, okay?
How many? Wait, hold on, stop.
There are approximately 100 former cities and towns that used to be predominantly African American that are either underwater or have been made into parks, right? Because you take the land away. So to go back to everything that we're talking about when we're talking about eminent domain, you know, if you don't want to see African Americans achieve, you take away land. So let me just say this. I want to give you guys some homework too. So there is a city by the name of, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, I may not be, Kowaglia, and it's spelled K-O-W-A-G, I'm sorry, Kowaliga, Alabama. That was an African-American town. It even had an African-American college on the site. It is now underwater. Susanna, Alabama, is now what is known as Lake Martin in Alabama. Just as Bernadette was saying, there was an African-American cemetery there because it was an African-American town. There were 900 bodies that were moved from the cemeteries before the land was submerged. But that was another African-American town where African-Americans were achieving, where they were thriving, that is now submerged underwater. Vanport, Oregon. So it didn't happen in the South. It happened as far away as Oregon. Okay, Vanport, Oregon was an African-American town, predominantly with 40,000 African-American residents, predominantly African-American residents. The town is gone. It's no more. There is no Vanport with African-Americans living there. It's a park now. And let's just also be clear. Again, it didn't just happen in the South. It happened in the North too. You know, there's this little park in New York called Central Park. Well, Central Park used to have two thriving African-American towns. One was Seneca Village and the other was Yorktown. Gone, eradicated, no more. So that they could build, so that they could,
Central Park.
Yeah, so that they could build Central Park. So this has happened time and time and time again. Right when African Americans achieve a thriving community, it is destroyed. It is either destroyed to submerge it with water, to turn it into a park, or to push a highway through, or to build an Olympic stadium. So this has been happening since 1912. Well, 1912 is when this happened to Lake Lanier, between 1912 and 1920. And since that time in Atlanta, 1996, the Olympics came through. 2021, we're pushing the Beltline through. Time and time and time again, African-American communities are being disproportionately impacted and killed. The town is being killed. I sometimes people think that I'm using using hyperbole when I say things like a town is being killed. But for the town of Oscarville, is it alive and thriving? No, it's gone. It's eradicated. You have to use words like killed because that's exactly what happened. That's not hyperbole. That's truth. That's what's happening. And the more you know, the better.
The better.
And so, for people who couldn't be on this call, your job, your duty is to make sure that people know. Make sure that you let other people know what is happening, know our history, right? Because if we don't know our history, then what? We're destined to repeat it. And I have to say, it seems to me that in 2021, we're still repeating it.
Yes.
It's happening.
So there are some questions I want us to get to before we do the Be Blessed giveaway. And it doesn't matter if you're Asian American from the continent of Asia, you're called an Asian American, you were impacted by this. Mexican Americans were impacted by this. We were impacted by this. If you were any person of color, you were impacted by this. Japanese Americans, it happened. And because of the way it happened, it's still impacting everyone today. But there's a couple of questions that came up in the chat that I put them on the thing, and I definitely want to get back to them because they're good questions. And so I'm going to ask you because, you teach race race in the law. You understand the impacts. You also understand some of the things that need to happen to make a change for us, right? And so one of the questions was, what can we do? The laws are against us, and they have been against us. And it's not even subtle when you know your history, right? And I'm gonna put a pin in that, because if anybody's paying attention, did y'all see the article recently that in Texas, they're passing a law that teachers no longer have to say the KKK was immoral. And they're also trying to pass a law where they don't have to talk about the Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech anymore. So you don't want to talk about critical race theory issues, but you want to take out things that we all know are fundamentally immoral. What? That being said, with the laws being used against us, what do we do?
Well, I'm going to tell you one thing and I've said this on your program before, Bernadette, and I know I'm going to get in trouble for it because people don't like when I say it. I'm always so disheartened that in a city like Atlanta, where we've had Black leadership since 1974, that we are still victimized to this degree. So what I'm going to say first and foremost is that we can always do something. Each one of us can do something. So for instance, when I was on your program before, I talked about, the fact that African Americans are incarcerated at a higher rate, that police officers obviously don't get held to the same standards if they shoot an African American, like they are usually allowed to go, right? If they are even tried at all. And I've said that one of the ways that we can influence that or impact that is when you get a jury summons, don't say, I don't want to go, or just throw it on the table, because what happens is that the person that is being charged with those crimes then ends up with a jury that is not of their peers. They get retired white people who are sitting at home that go in and serve on these juries. They don't look like the people that are charged. They're not the same race. They don't come from the same socioeconomic background. In their mind, they may already have stereotypes and biases. And so those people, get punished. And officers who may look like the people that are on the jury don't get punished. And so one little thing you can do there is go to jury service. Go do it. We don't like it. We don't want to do it, but we need to do it. Another thing, when we're talking about these laws that are being, that are taking place, sometimes it's too heavy when we think about it in terms of federal laws, right? Like, what am I going to do, sitting at home in Atlanta and there's this whole monster happening in DC. Listen, many times our local laws are more important to communities of color than even the federal laws. So what you need to do is, instead of just blindly voting for these people, hold them accountable, right? And don't just vote for somebody because so-and-so is voting for this person. Go and find out what these people's platform is, and you hold them accountable to it. If they said it on the campaign trail, you make sure that they adhere to what they said that they were going to do, right? The squeaky wheel gets the oil. You need to become more proactive, because I'm going to tell you, from my little time in politics, and I am by no means a politician, trust me, my little time in politics, I will say that people who call their elected officials all the time, right? Those are the ones that people listen to. If you sit back, if you're quiet, if you never say anything, nothing is ever going to change. You have to take the time. You know how the saying goes, I got time today? You need to find time today to pick up that phone and call your elected officials. Become a nuisance to the issues that matter to you, because we're actually in a fight, whether you realize it or not. We are actually in a fight. Okay, so I would say that every single day there is something that you can do. You can do, right?
And it starts with staying woke. It starts with being aware. It starts with having the information. And I'm just loving all the comments that are coming through the chat. And it's interesting, because even the laws for juries. So when you think about it, and Michael, I'm gonna address this issue with you. When you think about how juries are selected and how felons have their rights taken away in certain areas and are not allowed to serve on a jury, it even reduces the population of us who can serve on a jury. So because of the population of African Americans has already been significantly reduced because there's a check mark that says, oh, now they can't vote. Oh, now they can't serve on a jury. Oh, now they can't work as in this particular area. So there's all these boxes being checked, right? And there's this underlying current in place. It is more important than ever that those of us who can do.
Exactly.
Period. That those of us who can do. Now, guys, we're going to do our closing thoughts, but we're going to do this different today. I already know the number for the Be Blessed giveaway. You guys know how we do. Put 1 through 100 in the chat box, and this is how we're going to do it. You're going to be able to guess 3 different times, and the first person who I see the number pop up for is going to be the winner for the cash today on the Be Blessed segment. So you guys go ahead and start doing that 1 through 100 in the chat. Let me see your numbers coming up, and you can guess more than once, but only up to 3 times, because the first person who guesses the number 1 through 100 will win. So give us you kind of gave us your closing thoughts. But when it comes to this, what do you think has kind of like been the most impactful thing about today, about what we've shared with them? You've given them what they need to walk away with. What do you think is the most impactful thing about today?
Well, you know what? I think that everything that we talked about, was so important and needed to be heard. I think that the real thing that I want people to know is to look at this displacement. Know that even if it's not you, even if it's not your neighborhood, get involved. Because if it's happening to someone that looks like you, it could happen to you. There was a city council meeting where an older couple went in to talk about the fact that, there's nothing in place for them. They live in, I think, Peoplestown. And, just to make a long story short, the property taxes have gone up so exponentially because of the Beltline, and it's almost impossible for them to afford it. Their friends are leaving because, they either have lost their homes because they couldn't pay property taxes, or they have unilaterally sold because they couldn't pay their property taxes, and they're hanging on by just a thread. And so while they were in that city council member, one of the people that moved into the neighborhood, a white resident, said, why don't you just move to the country? And that goes back to that video that we saw earlier. People in these situations, they can't always move. They can't always get out. And if they do, it would mean uprooting them from their community entirely and sending them to live somewhere where there's no familiarity. They've lost their community. So I guess what I'm saying is be proactive and be intentional, because if it's happening to someone that looks like you, it could happen to you.
Excellent, excellent. And as you can see, we have a winner. I've put it on the screen. I want to say that is none other than Sean D. Williams, coming in at the number 33. And you can confirm it, but I'm pretty sure that's who it is. So Sean D. Williams coming in at the number 33. You know what to do. All you have to do is send me over your information to beblessed@bcwright.com. And let me go ahead and put that on the thing here so you can see it. beblessed@bcwright.com. Make sure you send your information there. And congratulations, you will be receiving $150 compliments of Unfiltered, as well as our birthday girl Gifty, who is sponsoring today's giveaway. So Murray, I have to come back to you and just like totally say, thank you so much. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us today. Thank you so much for everything you've shared. Thank you so much for just your continued support of the show. Everyone loves having you on, and we already know that class is in session, so we love that. But I want to definitely end with kind of what we started with. I want to end with what we started with, because there's something so profound, and maybe some of you guys missed it. So when we're talking about redlining, we showed this map. Redlining are actual maps that were created to say who could get loans. And the red areas are Black, Hispanic, non-white areas. The green areas are considered primary areas. This is an actual map, you guys, of Birmingham, Alabama. And I'm going to focus in on this green area because they were allowed to get all of the loans, right? And so that green area is a place called Mountain Brook. It's where the Birmingham Country Club is. You guys can see all the roads are still there. So what I did, just for you guys to really understand the impact that redlining happened decades ago is still having today, is I wanted to see, okay, what are the property values in those places that had access to wealth? What are the property values? And we saw earlier in the show that the Mountain Brook real estate, the Mountain Brook area is thriving. $1 million, $860,000, $3 million, $1.4 million, whereas one of the red areas, North Birmingham, they didn't fare so well. This is what their property values look like today. That's what they look like today. So next time you think about, what's happening in the community, next time you think about issues like housing in African-American communities, next time you consider what's wrong with the education, what's wrong with the access to opportunity from a work and employment standpoint, what's wrong from an environmental racism and health standpoint. All of these things had an impact because those red line communities never had access to wealth. They weren't able to create generational wealth, and it's still happening today. Those areas had roads that go through their town built, and nobody cared about that. Those areas also had like coal plants and things like that were always put in the red areas. Those areas, Murray, were thrown away.
Exactly.
So pay attention and stay woke. And the bottom line is, it's the same. It could be the same house in a different neighborhood with a different color person, and it's not going to have the same value. That was the impact back then. That is the impact today. And what I got to leave you guys with is this. Don't ever forget it. Don't ever forget it. There's an entire town lying beneath the water. So guys, until next time, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Attorney Winfield Ward Murray. We love you. Be blessed, guys. And of course, stay woke.
It's bigger than me. It's bigger than me. It's bigger, it's bigger than me. It's bigger than me. Yeah. It's bigger, yeah. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than me. Yeah, yeah. It's bigger, yeah. It's bigger than me. It's bigger. It's bigger than me. It's bigger. It's bigger.